The sand is already dark when Commodus steps forward. Blood has soaked deep into the floor of the Colosseum, pressed down by boots, bodies, and dragged shields until it clings to the ground like oil. Dust hangs in the air, caught in shafts of afternoon light pouring through the Valerium above. 50,000 Romans are on their feet, not rising in excitement, but standing because remaining seated would be noticed. At the center of the arena stands the Emperor of Rome, bare-chested, muscles oiled, a wooden sword raised high for the crowd to see. A lion's skin is draped over his shoulders, the paws knotted at his chest. He wants them to understand exactly who he believes he is. The roar comes on command. It always does. Senators clap until their palms burn. Knights shout themselves hoarse. Ordinary citizens scream, because silence here is dangerous. Commodus turns slowly, absorbing the sound, judging faces rather than volume. He is not watching the fight anymore. He is watching Rome. The man facing him is already wounded. His left leg drags slightly, blood seeping from beneath a hastily wrapped bandage. The blade in his hand has been dulled, its edge ground down so it will tear flesh but not cut deep. The rules of this contest were decided long before the gates opened. Commodus advances anyway, exaggerating each step, performing vulnerability for an audience that knows better. When he strikes, it is clean and theatrical. The wounded man falls. The emperor plants a foot on his chest and raises his weapon again. The crowd explodes. They have passed the test. To understand how Rome reached this moment, one has to step back from the arena and look at the illusion that surrounded it. By the late 2nd century of the Common Era, the Roman Empire appeared stable to the point of permanence. Its borders were guarded by hardened legions. Its roads stitched continents together. Grain flowed from Egypt, silver from Spain, soldiers from the Danube. The machinery of empire continued to function with or without the man at the top. That man, only a few years earlier, had been Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius ruled as if the office were a burden he was obligated to carry. He spent years on campaign along the northern frontiers, sleeping in tents, writing philosophical meditations by lamplight after days spent directing troop movements and negotiating with hostile tribes. He believed discipline, restraint, and duty were the price of power. When he died in 180 CE, Rome mourned a ruler who had tried to deserve his authority. His son Commodus inherited not only the throne, but the stability his father had preserved at enormous personal cost. He was 19 years old. He had no interest in philosophy, administration, or war. What he inherited bored him. What he craved was attention. At first, the transition seemed manageable. The Senate continued to meet. Governors remained in their provinces. The legions stayed loyal. Commodus allowed the system to run while he indulged himself in private. But the emperor was never content to be unseen. The problem was not that he ruled badly. The problem was that he did not believe ruling was enough. Commodus had grown up surrounded by symbols of power, statues, triumphs, titles spoken with ritual precision. To him, authority without spectacle felt empty. He did not want to be respected. He wanted to be watched. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the center of gravity in Roman political life began to shift away from the Senate and toward the games. The Colosseum had always been a place of control. Emperors understood that bread and spectacle kept the city calm. Commodus understood something darker. He realized the arena could be more than entertainment. It could be a stage where loyalty was measured in applause. He did not attend games as a patron. He entered them as a participant. At first, this was framed as novelty. The emperor hunting animals in the arena. The emperor testing himself against gladiators. Official announcements assured the public that these were demonstrations of courage, of divine favor. In reality, every detail was engineered. Animals were tethered or driven toward him. Gladiators chosen to face him were injured beforehand, exhausted, or armed with blunted weapons. Victory was guaranteed. Commodus insisted on payment for each appearance. Not symbolic sums, but enormous fees withdrawn directly from the imperial treasury. Rome paid its emperor to perform. Each appearance made the next more dangerous. The crowd learned quickly what was expected of them. Enthusiasm was no longer spontaneous. It was mandatory. Commodus watched closely. He remembered who cheered loudly and who did not. The arena became a place where political survival depended on volume. Senators understood this before anyone else. These were men who had survived purges, civil wars, and shifting dynasties. They knew how power changed hands. What they did not know was how to oppose a ruler who wielded popularity like a blade. There was no speech to counter him, no vote to restrain him. The emperor was turning the crowd itself into a weapon. Behind the scenes, governance decayed. Commodus delegated authority to favorites, men chosen for loyalty rather than competence. Bribes replaced procedure. Offices were sold. Justice became inconsistent and personal. But the empire did not collapse, and that was the most dangerous part. As long as the borders held and the grain ships arrived, there was no immediate crisis to justify intervention. Instead, fear spread quietly. Each appearance in the arena escalated Commodus' self-image. He no longer presented himself merely as a skilled fighter. He began to appear dressed as Hercules, Rome's adopted symbol of strength and divine ancestry. Lion skin, club, coins were minted showing him not as emperor, but as a living god. Statues followed. Titles accumulated. The distinction between man and myth began to dissolve. The crowd was forced to participate in this illusion. To cheer was to affirm it. To hesitate was to deny it. The arena became a loyalty test repeated again and again until applause itself lost meaning. It was no longer admiration. It was submission. Those closest to Commodus saw the danger clearly. They understood that the emperor was no longer pretending. He believed the role. And belief, in a man with absolute power, was far more dangerous than vanity. By the end of the 180s, Rome existed in a strange state of suspended dread. There were no invading armies at the gates, no mass rebellions. And yet, everyone understood that something fundamental had shifted. The emperor had made himself a spectacle, and the state was being dragged along behind him. The sand in the Colosseum was swept clean after each performance, but the memory of what happened there lingered. Senators went home with ringing ears and bruised hands from clapping too long. Citizens spoke in whispers. Soldiers avoided eye contact when the emperor's name was mentioned. Commodus planned his appearances carefully, spacing them out to maintain anticipation. Each return to the arena carried higher stakes. He was not just demonstrating dominance over opponents. He was demonstrating dominance over Rome itself. And still, no one moved against him. Not yet. By the final years of Commodus' reign, the arena was no longer enough. What had once shocked Rome now merely sustained him. Applause had become routine, stripped of novelty, and that frightened him. An emperor who feeds on spectacle must constantly escalate, or risk becoming ordinary. Commodus refused to be ordinary. He began to reshape the empire in his own image, not through reform, but through renaming. Rome itself was declared the Colonia Commodiana. The legions, the Senate, even the people were retitled to carry his name. Months of the year were altered to reflect his titles and victories that existed only in sand and shadow. Coins circulated across the empire bearing his image as Hercules, not as metaphor, but as fact. The message was unambiguous. Rome was no longer ruled by a man appointed by institutions. It was ruled by a living god who demanded recognition. Inside the Senate, fear hardened into paralysis. These men understood precedent. They knew emperors had been assassinated before. But Commodus had dismantled the old rules of opposition. He did not rely on the army's loyalty alone. He relied on the crowd. To strike at him publicly would require confronting the very masses trained to adore him on command. Even rumors of dissent were fatal. Accusations traveled quickly, often invented by informers eager to prove devotion. Trials were swift. Executions quieter than the games, but no less effective. Those closest to Commodus lived in constant calculation. His inner circle, concubines, advisors, trainers, understood his moods were unpredictable. He rewarded loyalty extravagantly and punished perceived slights without warning. His belief in his own divinity deepened. The line between performance and reality disappeared entirely. When he entered the arena, he was not pretending to be Hercules. He was reenacting what he believed to be truth. And still, the empire endured. That endurance masked the danger. Rome's systems continued to function just well enough to delay intervention. Grain shipments arrived. Taxes were collected. The legions stayed at their posts. There was no single catastrophic failure to rally opposition around. Instead, dread accumulated quietly, waiting for a moment when fear would outweigh caution. That moment arrived with Commodus' final plan. As the year 192 drew to a close, preparations began for the New Year's celebrations. Traditionally, January 1st marked the assumption of the consulship, a ritual that reaffirmed Rome's political order. Commodus announced he would participate, but not as emperor-consul. He would enter the Colosseum dressed as a gladiator, opening the year not with ceremony, but with blood. This was more than indulgence. It was a declaration. If carried out, it would collapse the last remaining distinction between Rome's institutions and his personal spectacle. The Senate understood what this meant. If the emperor could redefine the new year itself as an arena performance, then nothing remained outside his control. For the first time, fear overcame hesitation. The decision was not debated publicly. There were no speeches, no formal resolutions. Instead, a quiet consensus formed among those closest to Commodus. He could not be allowed to appear in the arena on January 1st, not because he would die there, but because Rome would. Poison was chosen as the least disruptive solution. It was discreet, deniable, familiar. On the night of December 31st, 192, Commodus was given a poisoned drink. For a time, it seemed to work. He grew weak, disoriented, but the dose failed to finish him. He vomited violently, expelling the poison, and began to recover. That failure sealed his fate. Those involved understood there would be no second chance. Commodus was paranoid even in health. Surviving an attempt on his life would unleash purges that would tear through the palace and the Senate alike. The decision had to be final. They turned to a man who understood the emperor's body better than anyone else. Narcissus was Commodus' wrestling partner and physical trainer. He had spent years grappling with the emperor, indulging his obsession with strength and dominance. He was trusted, allowed close when others were kept at distance. In Rome, intimacy was always dangerous. On that night, it became lethal. Narcissus entered the bath chamber where Commodus lay weakened, still retching from the failed poison. There was no ceremony, no declaration. He strangled the emperor with his bare hands. The struggle was brief. The man who had demanded the roar of 50,000 died in silence, steam rising from the bath, his body collapsing not onto sand, but marble. Commodus was 31 years old. News of his death spread cautiously. There was no public announcement at first, no immediate celebration. Rome had learned to be careful. Only when it became clear that the emperor was truly dead did relief surface. Muted, restrained, exhausted. The Colosseum did not roar. It did not need to. The spectacle was over. The aftermath was immediate and violent. Commodus' death did not restore stability. It exposed how fragile that stability had been. Within months, Rome descended into the year of the five emperors, a sequence of coups and civil conflict that revealed the damage done by years of neglect and fear. The illusion of permanence shattered almost overnight. Commodus himself was condemned by the Senate. His name was erased from monuments. His statues were torn down or recarved. The godhood he demanded dissolved into infamy. Yet even in condemnation, his legacy lingered. He had shown Rome something uncomfortable about power, not how it is seized through force, but how it can be hollowed out through performance. Commodus did not rule by terror alone. He ruled by compelling participation. Every cheer in the arena had reinforced his authority. Every forced applause had trained the population to equate survival with submission. The Colosseum, designed to display Rome's dominance over enemies and nature, had become a mirror reflecting its internal decay. In trying to make himself eternal through spectacle, Commodus reduced the empire to an audience, watching, clapping, afraid to look away. History remembers him as a mad emperor, a gladiator king, a tyrant obsessed with his own reflection. But the deeper lesson is quieter and more unsettling. Rome did not fall because Commodus fought in the arena. It suffered because too many people learned to applaud instead of resist. The arena did not kill Commodus. It revealed him, and in doing so, it showed how easily power can rot when performance replaces responsibility. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or felt uncomfortably familiar, then history has done its job. Remember it, because empires do not always collapse under invasion. Sometimes they collapse under applause.